The sinister group, known as the Hashshashin, is like a curse that is spewed forth from the darkest corners of existence. They are not merely a faction to be wary of, but creatures that embody the deepest fears of the human soul. Their eyes, like bloody pits, seek not the sanctity of life, but only the cold breath of death. For them, neither life holds value, nor salvation offers comfort. Their sole purpose is to fulfill the bloody promises that echo in the whispers of the devil. They do not hesitate to sell themselves. At times, they assume the guise of a friend, a sage, or even a cleric. They masterfully mimic the languages, gestures, and clothing of nations, thereby stealing the trust of the innocent people before their very eyes. Those who see them are, in fact, beholding the mask of hell on faces they mistake for an angel's peace. Like hungry wolves concealed in sheep's clothing, they wait, searching for a single opening, a single weakness. And when that moment arrives, their end is always the same: death, blood, and a silent annihilation. Yet their deaths are not ordinary. When their victims feel the steel of the dagger in their hearts, it is as if the sky darkens, and the stars one by one fade away and abandon them. Their screams blend into the night, their echoes lingering on stone walls like the groans of a phantom. The footprints of this secret society leave a black omen wherever they tread. This is why the Hashshashin are not merely enemies. They are a plague that has afflicted existence itself, a curse from which even the shadows recoil in disgust. It is necessary to keep a distance from them, to curse them, and to refrain from even uttering their names. For once one opens their door, they step onto a path of no return. And at the end of that path, the only thing waiting is the cold embrace of death. Before delving into these dark and forgotten tales of survival, if you enjoy learning about the hidden and frightening aspects of history, liking and subscribing to this narrative will allow us to explore these cold secrets of the past together. Also, sharing where you're listening to this story from in the comments will allow us to connect with one another on this dark journey that transcends time and space. Following the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, the Islamic world established the institution of the Caliphate to fill the leadership void. The first person to take on this sacred responsibility was Abu Bakr, one of the Prophet's closest friends and an early convert to Islam. Although a large part of the Ummah tried to remain united with his selection, a certain segment of the population claimed this decision was not correct. According to them, the caliphate was the right of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the person closest to the Prophet by blood, who was also his son-in-law and cousin. Although these disagreements seemed like mere disputes at the time, they were in fact the first sparks of a sectarian schism that would last for centuries in the Islamic world. Following Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab and Uthman ibn Affan were successively elected as caliphs. However, a significant number of Ali's supporters never fully accepted the legitimacy of these three caliphs. The situation became even more complex when Caliph Uthman was assassinated by rebels. Following Uthman's death, the people finally chose Ali as caliph. However, this election, instead of bringing the expected unity, opened the door to a new chaos. Uthman's supporters declared that they would not pledge allegiance to Ali until the killer was found and punished. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, who was the governor of Damascus at the time, accused Ali of being responsible for Uthman's death and started an open conflict against him. Thus began a period of bloody civil wars in the Islamic world. Major conflicts like the Battle of the Camel and the Battle of Siffin divided the Ummah into two. On one side were those who defended Ali's righteousness, while on the other were those who rallied around Muawiyah. That was not all. A third group, the Kharijites, rejected both sides and attempted to defend Islam with their own rigid interpretations. The tragedy culminated in the assassination of Ali. Three Kharijites planned an attack on Ali one night with poisoned daggers. Ultimately, Ali was fatally wounded by dagger blows while on his way to dawn prayers and passed away shortly after. His death plunged his followers into great mourning and despair. The caliphate had now passed into the hands of Muawiyah. Muawiyah took steps to make the caliphate a permanent legacy within his own lineage, and in this process, the Umayyad dynasty was born. The establishment of this dynasty completely shattered the political unity of the Islamic world, creating three main factions: the Umayyad supporters, the followers of Ali, the Shia, and the Kharijites. From then on, no one in the Islamic world would fully accept the caliphate of another. A new caliph would emerge from every region, and civil wars would continue for generations. Those who believed that the descendants of Ali were worthy of the caliphate were eventually called Shia. They never embraced the Umayyad rule. In their hearts, there was always a longing for a savior against the Umayyad oppression. For this reason, they chose Ali's sons, Hassan and Hussein, and later an insurgent leader named Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, as their leaders. However, each time, their hopes were crushed with blood. Hassan was poisoned to death, Hussein was martyred in Karbala, and Mukhtar was killed after failing in his rebellion. Thus, the Islamic world, once united around a single ummah, was now irreversibly divided. This division was not merely a political conflict. It became a struggle of faith, identity, and belonging passed down from generation to generation. And the fuse lit in those days laid the foundation for conflicts that would continue to this day, both in the Arab world and beyond. Even centuries later, Shia communities did not give up on their hopes. What remained alive in their hearts was always a longing for a savior. Every oppression, every tyranny, and every defeat only amplified this longing. Over time, the doctrine of the 12 Imams emerged within Shia thought. According to this doctrine, there was an Imam chosen by God in every era, and these Imams were considered the true guides of the Ummah. The seventh in this chain of 12 Imams was Ja'far al-Sadiq, renowned for his wisdom and profound knowledge. The disciples who gathered around him fed on their leader's sagacity. However, the question of who would be the next Imam after Ja'far led the Shia world to a new fork in the road. According to the traditional lineage, the imamate should have passed to Ja'far's son, Ismail. But unlike the generally peaceful, patient, and conciliatory approach of the Twelver Shia doctrine, Ismail had a more combative and sharp temperament. For this reason, his father, also considering the political balance, took the right of imamate from Ismail and gave it to his other son, Musa al-Kazim. However, Ismail did not back down from the path he believed in. He chose struggle, not silence. It was at this point that a new vein sprouted within Shi'ism, Ismailism. Those who followed Ismail began to live out their beliefs in secret societies. For them, this world was always a realm surrounded by enemies. Therefore, secrecy, taqiyya, dissimulation, and deceit were an inevitable means of survival. However, Ismail did not back down from the path he believed in. He chose struggle, not silence. It was at this point that a new vein sprouted within Shi'ism, Ismailism. Those who followed Ismail began to live out their beliefs in secret societies. For them, this world was always a realm surrounded by enemies. Therefore, secrecy, taqiyya, dissimulation, and deceit were an inevitable means of survival. Over time, the Ismailis developed their own unique doctrine. According to them, anything could be justified for a sacred cause. Lying, deception, and even bloodshed could be used to achieve justice and salvation. This understanding was the sharpest point that distinguished them from other Islamic communities. They lived in silence and invisibility, in mountain villages, remote towns, and secret lodges. But their silence was deceptive. For at the same time, they were sending spies into the palaces of states, the marketplaces of cities, and the ranks of armies. Every piece of information, every secret, was a preparation for their great future move. The Ismailis were waiting for the arrival of the Mahdi, in whom they believed, and they dreamed that when that day came, they would overturn the entire Islamic world. This was not merely a belief, but an ideology that would be written in blood and iron. The person who would make the dark veins of this movement his life's philosophy would appear on the stage of history much later, Hassan I-Sabbah. He not only embraced the Ismaili teachings, but also turned them into a disciplined, systematic, and fear-inducing organization. A new shadow would begin to roam the dark pages of history with his name, the Hashshashin. But to understand Hassan-i-Sabbah, one must first know the dark roots of the Ismaili thought that nurtured him. For Sabbah is much more than a man. He is the embodiment of centuries of suppressed anger, a rebellion born of oppression, and a secret organization made flesh. Hassan-i-Sabbah was a shadow whose name began to be whispered through the mists of the 11th century. His birthplace and year, like his very existence, are shrouded in a veil of secrecy. Some accounts say he was born in the city of Qom, one of the strongholds of Imami life. He came from a well-established, devout, and highly learned family. From his childhood, he had a penchant for knowledge and hidden wisdom, as if foretelling that a dark power would occupy his mind. Philosophy, mathematics, theology, and jurisprudence. The young Hassan's mind was shaped by these disciplines. But he was not content with knowledge alone. He also carried a longing for power and leadership within him. Even as a teenager, he set his mind on becoming a leading sheikh, not just an ordinary scholar or disciple. This ambition led him to the city of Ray. The education he received there sharpened his mind even further. However, it also led to a dark encounter that would change the direction of his destiny. For in Ray, he met a mysterious Fatimid named Emi-Razarap. This person was the first link in the chains of fate that would be forged upon Hassan's soul. Emi-Razarap revealed to him the secrets of the Ismaili faith, a doctrine seemingly peaceful, but at its core, one steeped in blood and intrigue. Hassan broke away from the Imami lineage of his family and entered the secret network of this new sect. Thus, his ties with the Fatimids deepened, and Hassan-i-Sabbah's path became one of no return. In a short time, thanks to the sharpness of his knowledge and the mesmerizing power of his words, his name began to be spoken in Ray. People saw him not just as a sage, but as a harbinger of power. But at the same time, whispers circulated that he was in contact with Ismaili agents and was conducting secret propaganda. As these rumors grew, the shadows cast upon him grew darker. Eventually, a warrant for his arrest was issued. Hassan-i-Sabbah could no longer find refuge in his own land. He left Ray in 1076, with the shadows of spies in pursuit and the breath of death on his neck. He traveled in hiding, constantly changing locations, always navigating between ambushes and betrayals. Wherever he went, he acquired new disciples and new connections. His invitation spread from ear to ear like the ominous voice of a prophecy. Eventually, his path led to Egypt, the heart of the Fatimids. He did not stop there either. He increased his contacts and multiplied his followers. But this rapid rise also brought a great danger. Hassan-i-Sabbah was no longer just a preacher. He was a leader dancing with death. His name evoked fear and suspicion. His enemies found even his shadow dangerous. Assassins repeatedly targeted him. Daggers and poisons never left his trail. But each time, it was as if the darkness was protecting him. Thus, Hassan-i-Sabbah began to transform from an ordinary man into one of history's cursed figures. His rise was the first chapter of a legend written with blood, shadows, and whispers. And in the continuation of this legend, a fear that would engulf an entire world would be born within the stone walls of Alamut. For years, Hassan-i-Sabbah roamed like a ghost. He could neither find a permanent home in the cities he visited nor completely shake off the Seljuk pursuit. However, every step he took, every secret sermon, every whispered meeting created an echo. Those who saw him could not decide whether he was a sage in human form or an emissary sent by the devil. For Hassan-i-Sabbah's greatest power was his words. The words that came out of his mouth would penetrate the hearts of his listeners like poison, sometimes giving hope, sometimes fear, but ultimately enslaving them all. The disciples who stood by him became not slaves, but fanatics who had seemingly surrendered their souls. So much so that when one looked into their eyes, the thing that shone was not faith, but an absolute loyalty to Hassan's shadow. But Sabbah was not content with only being a master of hearts. He infiltrated his disciples into villages, towns, and the narrow streets of cities. They roamed the marketplaces in the guise of merchants, visited inns in the form of dervishes, and sometimes sat in village coffee houses like ordinary travelers. Everywhere, they whispered Hassan's name and spread the secrets of Ismailism. This invisible network gradually turned into a vast spiderweb. However, Hassan's plan was far greater than this secret army. He would not rely solely on his disciples. He would build a fortress, a headquarters, a sacred center for them to take refuge in. For he knew that the breath of the Seljuks was on his neck. One day they would surely attack. When that day came, a fortress on a mountaintop would be both his shield and his dagger. He turned his eyes to an ancient and formidable structure, Alamut Castle. Alamut rose from a place that even nature seemed to have surrendered. Today located within the borders of Qazvin, Iran, this castle was in the hands of the Daylamites at that time. But it was no ordinary structure, built on bare rock. It was like a stone spear driven into the tough ribs of the mountains. It stood 2,000 meters above sea level, and from its height, the horizon stretched for 50,000 meters. The steep cliffs surrounding the castle were like dark teeth, rising toward the sky. It could only be accessed via narrow paths, and a single wrong step would send a person tumbling into an endless abyss. Even a person who managed to reach the gate of Alamut would lose all hope with just a single glance at the castle, even before fighting. For this place seemed to have been woven not with stones, but with death itself. When Hassan I Sabah saw this castle, he had found his destiny. Alamut would not be just a pile of stones, but the throne of his rising empire of shadows. Here, he would turn his disciples into a fanatical army. From here, he would rule not with daggers, but with fear. And from that day on, the name of Alamut would be uttered with dread throughout the world. Alamut was a nightmare not only with its stone walls, but also with its inaccessibility. Perched on the summit of the rocks, the castle resembled an eagle's nest soaring towards the sky. This is why its name was Alamut, meaning eagle's nest. This was a place where anyone who dared to attack had to first kill their own hope. Hassan I Sabah knew he could not take this place by brute force. So he turned his words into daggers and his spies into venomous shadows. Slowly, he infiltrated his agents into the castle, enveloping the inside like a spider, threatening its ruler, and eventually seating himself on the throne of Alamut. From that moment on, Hassan I Sabah would no longer be called the master of the mountains, but the old man of the mountain, in the common tongue. Inside the stone walls of Alamut, Sabah's power transformed into fear. Thousands of disciples flocked to his call. For them, Hassan was not just a leader, but the Mahdi whom the Ismailis had been waiting for. Some saw him as a prophet and knelt before him. According to legend, most of his disciples never even saw his face. Sabah would show his face only to a select few chosen for special missions. For others, he remained a figure behind the shadows, an invisible holiness. Thus, his mystery increased his fear many times over. This organization, called the Hashshashin, quickly began to spread like an ominous mist over the entire Islamic world. When their name was whispered, the fear of death would pierce people's hearts. This silent growth became so terrifying that even the Seljuk Sultan Malik Shah could no longer be patient. He sent an army to wipe Hassan I Sabah's nest, Alamut, from the face of the earth. The castle remained under the siege of the Seljuk armies for months. However, Alamut was in such a place that it was like a stone tomb carved into the sky. It was almost impossible to reach this structure built on steep cliffs. The soldiers struggled with hunger, thirst, and the cruel conditions of the mountain. And it was as if fate itself had sided with Hassan I Sabah. During the siege, Sultan Malik Shah suddenly died. With his death, the Seljuk army was forced to disperse. The old man of the mountain had won his victory without shedding a single drop of his own blood. But this was only the beginning of his blood-soaked path. Sabah planned his first great assassination. The target was the most powerful man of the Seljuk state, the symbol of justice and order, Nizam al-Mulk. He was so highly regarded that his name had become synonymous with the order of the state itself, Nizam-i-Mulk. But when one of Hassan-i-Sabbah's disciples emerged from the shadows and plunged his dagger into him, the powerful vizier collapsed to the ground. This assassination was not just the death of a man. It was a dagger plunged into the heart of an empire. From that day on, everyone knew that Hassan-i-Sabbah's hand was now stained with blood, and this blood would fall drop by drop not only on the Seljuk Empire but on the entire Islamic world. Nizam al-Mulk's end came with an unexpected shadow. According to accounts, he had just left the bath on that day and was eating a peaceful meal in his tent. While those around him admired his splendor, no one paid attention to the approaching stranger. This person, in the guise of an ordinary petitioner, seemed to be holding a plea to describe an injustice he had suffered, slowly stepping into the tent. But in the eyes of this simple-looking stranger, another fire was burning, the fire of death lit by Hassan-i-Sabbah. As he approached the table, he suddenly reached his hand under his robe, drew the hidden dagger, and plunged it into Nizam al-Mulk's chest. The tent instantly echoed with screams, and drops of blood were sprinkled on the table. As the assassin tried to flee, his foot caught on a tent rope. As he fell, his face hit the ground. At that moment, he thrashed like a chained slave, trying to rise like a shadow. Nizam al-Mulk's men threw themselves upon him. With screams and dagger blows, they killed the assassin right there. Yet, even as he died, blood-mixed words poured from his lips. Hassan-i-Sabbah's name, the propaganda of Ismailism. Even while embracing death, he was proclaiming his faith. This event became a turning point not just for the Seljuks, but for the entire region. The name of the Hashshashin was now written in blood. The Dark Order had started hunting not ordinary people, but those in the highest ranks. Sultans, viziers, generals, governors. One by one, they were put on a target board. The Fidais commissioned by Hassan-i-Sabbah did not even attempt to escape after killing their targets. They stood erect over their victims, looking up at the sky and shouting Hassan-i-Sabbah's name. Every word that poured from their lips was both a curse and an invitation, the call of those who were not afraid to die for the banner of Ismailism. As they accepted the executioner's blows that followed, their faces showed not fear, but a kind of ecstatic tranquility. As these scenes were etched into people's minds, the name of the Hashshashin became a symbol of terror. They were no longer a death whispering from the shadows, but a nightmare that came to the gates of palaces in broad daylight. Every ruler, every commander, every governor felt the presence of a Fidai waiting behind their door, and they could no longer sleep peacefully at night. The name of the Hashshashin now echoed not only in the rugged mountains of the East, but also in the stone castles of Europe. From the 13th century onward, the word assassin itself became synonymous with murderer in Western languages, a word identical with fear. Their stories echoed along caravan routes, crossing continents with the whispers of merchants. Everyone said the same thing. These people had chosen not to die, but to bring death. Hassan-i-Sabbah's order had set its roots in the deepest shadows. Young boys, torn from their families at an early age, would never see their old lives again. They were no longer ordinary children, but seeds shaped for death. Their training, which began in small cells behind high walls, continued uninterrupted for years. Their childhood was taken away, and their bodies and souls were patiently molded. These young men were not only taught to use a sword or a dagger, they could speak different languages, wear the clothes of different peoples, and flawlessly mimic the gestures of various nations. For the Fidais were not just warriors, they were also ghosts cloaked in shadow, masters of disguise. One day they would appear as merchants, the next as dervishes, another time as pilgrims. To recognize them was as difficult as escaping fate. But the most terrifying part of their training was not their weapons or language, but their minds. Their teachers etched a single sentence into their souls. The order of your leader is the order of God. The punishment for a small betrayal was death. The reward for blind obedience was the gates of heaven. The gardens promised to them were a realm of fantasy filled with unimaginable beauty. Rivers flowing like wine, inexhaustible blessings, the immortal faces of Hurries. This promise worked like poison on the children's hearts. tearing them from the pain of reality and dragging them into the ecstasy of the shadows. After years of this silent preparation, each Fidei would see no face and hear no word from the outside world until they came into the presence of their master. Their world was only Hashshashin's word. That is why giving their lives at a sign from their master was neither a pain nor a loss for them. On the contrary, it was a key that opened the door to an eternal reward. Their eerie composure in society fueled a great mystery. Whispers spread among the people. They performed these acts not of their own will, but under the influence of a substance. Some said they had tasted heaven and returned, while others claimed they were intoxicated with hashish-scented, mysterious elixirs. The truth is unknown, but one thing was certain. The Hashshashin embraced the cold face of death with a smile. One of Hashshashin's most horrifying games was, without a doubt, his fake paradise. For he knew that a sober mind would not agree to such blind devotion. To take possession of the human soul, fear alone was not enough. A false hope, a false salvation, was also needed. This is why, in the hidden heart of Alamut, he created an illusion that surpassed the power of human imagination. It is rumored that the famous traveler Marco Polo, who came to Persia years later, recounted these dark legends he heard from the people. The old man of the mountain was named Ala al-Din. He had sealed a valley between two mountains with an iron gate and turned it into a garden unlike any on earth. In it, palaces soaring to the sky, dazzling pavilions, and rooms with walls inlaid with gold and emeralds rose. Fruit trees overflowed from their branches, and channels flowed with wine, milk, honey, and clear water. Young girls and women, like beautiful houris, created heavenly melodies with the instruments in their hands, and enchanting songs poured from their lips. This garden was only open to the Hashshashin Fidais. First, they were made to drink intoxicating elixirs. Their minds would be clouded, their bodies numb, and their eyelids heavy. And when the young men reopened their eyes, they found themselves inside this paradise born from hell. Cool shadows under the trees, intoxicating scents, air heavy with drink. The hands that touched their bodies, the words whispered into their ears, the splendor that dazzled their eyes. All of it was more real than a dream. But this dream was also a trap. For after a while, the same elixir was given again, and the young men were put back to sleep. When they awoke, there was no wine or houris, only the suffocating coldness of Alamut's stone walls. And finally, the presence of Hashshashin. With the shock of this sudden transition, the young man would come to believe that what he had seen was not a dream but reality. For what he tasted in the garden was for him the exact description of the paradise spoken of by the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the old man of the mountain was no longer just a leader. He appeared as a prophet-like envoy, the only door between God and the world. The young Fidei would kneel, press his forehead to the stone floor, and prostrate himself. In his prostration, there was no fear, but an unwavering faith. For now, in his eyes, Hashshashin was the one who held the key to paradise, the master of immortality. And at that very moment, for these young men, death was no longer an end, but the very door that would open to paradise once more. All of this was based on whispers among the people. Documents did not prove the existence of a fake paradise. But the line between reality and legend blurred under the shadow of the Hashshashin. The Seljuk state had waged a constant war against this dark organization, but neither city walls, nor castle gates, nor palace guards could stop the Hashshashin's insidious infiltration. It is rumored that one morning a sultan awoke to find a dagger plunged into the ground beside his bed. This was a clear threat, sent by a hand that promised death without a blink. While the sultan was investigating which shadow had carried out this act, a letter from Hashshashin suddenly reached him. The lines of the letter contained a chilling composure. "If I wish, this dagger will be plunged into your heart." Hashshashin was as notorious for his ruthlessness as he was for his intelligence. Disciples who did not follow the rules were inevitably executed. It is even said that he sacrificed his own 2 sons for acting against the Hashshashin tradition. He was a figure who both inspired fear among the people and was so loathed that he was declared a devil. When his name was spoken, some would tremble, while others would show helpless respect. The Hashshashin had an unparalleled ability to blend into the shadows. One day they would disguise themselves as Christians to infiltrate churches, and the next day they would serve in mosques as Sunni dervishes. They could even slyly penetrate the highest echelons of the state, pulling even the most secure places into their dark network. This ability created a deep paranoia among the populace, because no one could be sure. Your most trusted friend, confidant, or advisor could be a Hashshashin, and at any moment, in the most unexpected place, you could feel a dagger in your heart. In the cities, no commander or officer dared to step outside their home without protection. Every step was a door opening to the shadows. Every whisper was a harbinger of death. Hashshashin Sabah and his fidais roamed like an invisible nightmare, filling the corridors of palaces, the crowds of bazaars, and the mountain villages with equal terror. Everyone knew that there was a power waiting behind the shadows, and this power wove death and darkness together. During the reign of Muhammad Topper, the Hashshashin perhaps experienced their darkest and most difficult period in history. To be caught in their shadow was like a death sentence. Anyone with the slightest suspicion of being a Hashshashin was brutally executed in public. The streets were stained with blood-soaked stones, and people's faces were frozen with fear and astonishment. Every glance feared the shadow of a shadowy. Every whisper carried the footsteps of death. Despite this, the Hashshashin continued to gather strength from the shadows. They captured many castles, expanding their dark armies. Emerging from the shadow of Alamut, they established new headquarters on mountaintops and in the depths of valleys. Hashshashin Sabah continued to orchestrate assassinations until his death. When he died of natural causes within the stone walls of Alamut, it evoked different reactions among the people. Some celebrated with great joy, as if the devil himself had been laid low. But others, with a silent and terrifying admiration, contemplated the legacy in the shadows of Alamut. Initially established to infiltrate certain districts and fight against the Sunnis, the Hashshashin took a new direction after Sabah's death. They now carried out paid assassinations, bringing death with a whispered command from the shadows. Over time, the network of these dark deeds spread beyond borders, reaching Jerusalem and the castles of Europe. According to legends, 68 years after Sabah's death, Conrad of Montferrat from the Latin Kingdom lost his life to the tip of a Hashshashin's dagger, and for the first time in history, a Christian tasted the touch of this dark hand. As the fame of the Hashshashin spread to distant lands, though names like Queen Elizabeth I of England and Richard the Lionheart pursued them, the fidais were always one step ahead with their mysterious shadows. However, over time, this sacred order began to corrupt. The sect, originally shaped by anti-Sunni sentiment and Ismaili faith, had now turned into a criminal organization. At times, fake sheiks were put in charge of the organization. Money and symbols of power prevailed over sacred belief. But no matter how powerful they were, the Hashshashin eventually hit a hard rock. Even in the dark realms of time, shadows could not rule forever. Their story was etched into history as a symbol of both fear and terror. The legends that grew in the shadow of Alamut were whispered from generation to generation, and people still lived in fear that one of these shadows might come and plunge a dagger into their hearts. The Hashshashin pursued Genghis Khan, known as the most ruthless master of the shadows in history. When that terrifying news reached the Mongol leader's ears, he was forced to take extraordinary security measures. For the death that could come from the hands of these shadows was as dangerous as a dagger plunged into the heart of the empire. Now, the Mongols themselves had begun to directly face the darkness of the shadows. Hulagu Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan and the son of Talyui. When the young Hulagu Khan reached adulthood, he became a vital strategic force for the Mongols. His intelligence and power, his ability to eliminate his rivals one by one, were known by Monk Khan. Therefore, the young leader was sent on a campaign to the Near East. The control of the Mongol invasions was now in Hulagu Khan's hands. His goal was to expand the lands and bury every resistance in the shadows. But at that time, the world was under the threat of the death-dealing shadows of the Hashshashin. The order, which had grown strong in Persia and Syria, was spreading its shadows with its death-ready fidais behind the stone walls of Alamut. In December 1256, Hulagu Khan and his army laid siege to one of history's most impossible castles, Alamut. This castle had been besieged hundreds of times before, but had never once been taken. The Mongol army filled the area. Around 200,000 pieces of equipment and tents were set up. But Alamut rose on steep and jagged rocks. Only one narrow path led to the fortress, and using Mongol assault methods, there would mean disaster and defeat. This castle, at a height of 2,000 meters, would not surrender easily. The soldiers and commanders waited in despair, finding it hard to believe that this castle woven from stone and shadow could be taken. But Hulagu Khan was known as much for his ruthlessness as for his intelligence. For situations like this, he always kept scientists, engineers, and strategic experts with his army. In the meeting tent, under a dark light, words flowed like blood as he planned with his engineers. Every command that came from his mouth coursed through the veins of the army like a fire of death, sparking both fear and determination in the soldiers' eyes. In Hulagu Khan's eyes, this war, where they would confront the shadows of Alamut, was not a game. It was a death ritual. And this ritual would witness the darkness within the stone walls meeting the Mongol daggers. Hulagu Khan infiltrated the Alamut's stone walls and sharp cliffs like a shadow. He ordered thousands of holes to be dug deep into the mountain. These holes, like the dark veins of the fortress, concealed seeds of death. After the holes were dug, his command came again: fill every cavity with gunpowder. Thus, Alamut was transformed into the world's most lethal trap, a shadow bomb. Upon seeing this terrible threat, the then leader of the fortress, Rukn al-Din Kersha, trembled in terror. The Fadais in the castle were slaughtered one by one in fear and despair. The shadows were now facing their own destiny. Alamut, the darkest and most death-dealing center of history, had for the first time been brought to such a helpless state. But for Hulagu Khan, this was not enough. The dark heart of the organization had to be eliminated, ripped out by its roots. The oil and gunpowder inside the mountain were set alight. Like a dark day, the entire mountain trembled. The explosion was so powerful that the sky was covered in flames and smoke. The stone walls rising at the summit of Alamut crumbled one by one, and the shadows were torn apart and scattered into the air. This fortress, which for centuries was considered impregnable, was now leveled. The echo of the explosion rang through the valleys, and even the shadow of a shadow was erased. The horror behind this operation was not only the genius of Hulagu Khan, but also the mastery of the Khitan engineers. Their plans were as flawless as death itself. Alamut was buried in the dark annals of history. As for Rukn al-Din's life, it was left to the mercy of Hulagu Khan. He was sent to his brother, Monk Khan, with a request for the decision to be left to him. But Monk Khan was not as forgiving as his brother Hulagu Khan. He ended Rukn al-Din's life with a ruthless dagger blow. Now, the shadows of Alamut were completely gone, and history's most lethal organization was buried forever in the depths of history. And so, the world's most terrifying and dark organization, along with the death and terror it spread like a shadow, mingled with the dusty pages of history, leaving behind only the broken stones from the walls, smoke, and the horror that echoed in memories.